Today I'm going to give you 5 undeniable reasons why you must believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's coming up next on The Beat. Hey everyone, my name is Alan Parr. Thank you all so much for tuning into The Beat. Today we want to ask the question, how can we know for sure that Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead? I mean, is this just some myth or some clever fable that a group of people made up that has trickled down throughout history that we have just been told to believe? Or is there some evidence or some proof that this is really indeed the truth? And so today I want to give you 5 undeniable reasons why you must believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Okay, but allow me to lay down some ground rules on the sort of evidence that will be accepted. You see, Christians very often appear confused when I pull apart what they assert as evidence because they have a very problematic view as to what evidence actually is. Starting with the basics, evidence is not merely assertion. Anyone can add elements to a story and assert that said added elements validate their claims. But what really matters is actual evidence which can be supplied independently and scrutinized. Take, for example, witnesses as a popular example surrounding the miracle of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, whilst eyewitness testimony already has many problems when it comes to accuracy, there are further issues in how Christians try to support this miracle. The argument typically goes that since the Bible asserts the presence of no less than 5,000 people, that assertion is equivalent to eyewitness testimony from 5,000 individual sources. The reality, of course, is that said description is only a singular testimony that asserts without basis the presence of 5,000 individuals. I would still need 5,000 individual testimonies to actually have the level of evidence the Christian asserts. This can also exist with ad hoc additives. For example, if I claim that last weekend I flew without the aid of a machine, a reasonable person may respond to this with questions about how I managed to fly, to which I could merely assert that I temporarily grew wings which then withered and dropped off without leaving a mark. I could then mix this with the previous element and say that 4 academics from my university saw this occur, but neither of these assertions would be evidence. So keeping this in mind, let us see how your arguments do.
Reason number 1 is because of the precautions of the Romans. Now you must understand that the Romans started hearing rumors that the disciples were going to come and steal the body of Jesus Christ away and say that he rose from the dead. And so in order to prevent this from happening, they did 3 things. First of all, they put what's called a guard around the tomb. And a guard was nothing more than a group of 10 to 30 soldiers who were highly trained to protect this tomb and guard it with their lives.
Okay. And your evidence for this guard, other than the assertions of the book of Matthew written generations after the events it supposedly describes, is what? Do you have a Roman garrison report or a letter perhaps? I can't take the claim that there was a guard stationed on the Bible's word alone. I need independent verification from that time.
The second thing they did was they put a stone around the opening of the tomb, and this stone weighed somewhere close to 3,000 or 4,000 pounds, and so this hindered anybody who wanted to come in or get out.
Right, and your evidence for said stone as well as its weight is what exactly? Also, with this one, even if there was a stone in front of the tomb, said stone would have had to have been moved there in the first place. Ergo, the stone could be moved either way. It was just a question as to how many people. So again, this is assertion, not evidence, and in no way validates your claims.
And then the third thing they did is actually put a Roman seal around this stone such that if anyone tampered with or broke this seal, they were punished by death. So to suggest, as some would, that the disciples broke in and stole the body of Jesus Christ and claimed that he rose from the dead would be highly unlikely, because here is a group of fishermen and tax collectors, and the Bible says shortly before Jesus was crucified that all of them were terrified and afraid and forsook Jesus and ran for their lives. And to think that this fearful group somehow got enough courage to break through a group of highly trained soldiers and steal the body of Jesus Christ is highly unlikely.
Except again, no record of this with the Romans or any other source, so it's not evidence, it's assertion, it requires evidence. This is merely the supernatural equivalent of a teenager saying that they got into a fight and managed to take down 4 other people before one of them gave them a black eye, when really, they ran into a low-set door whilst drunk. There's no other evidence to support their claims, merely their word which, by the way, changes between each retelling as with the Bible. It's a way to retrospectively remove negative feelings surrounding something whilst making yourself look good. Maybe the apostles did it, maybe only a couple did, or maybe the grave was pillaged by a different group entirely. Grave desecration was not uncommon for a number of reasons, one of which is revenge. You have noted yourself that Christ apparently had many enemies. Could one of them have destroyed their body as a final insult, a denial for them to enter heaven? The apostles could have just been covering for that, or they truly believed he'd risen because of their ignorance of the other group. I'm reminded of suicide. Durkheim was a founding father of sociology who mapped out rates of suicide by religion and found that Catholics had the lowest rates of suicide on paper. Now, he declared that this was the result of Catholics having a greater community to support them. Yet later down the line, this has been criticized on the basis that coroners, knowledgeable of the facts that suicide is a sin in Catholicism, were more likely to rule natural causes of death out of empathy for the family, to comfort them by not ruling something which they believe would destroy their family members' chances of entering heaven. Likewise, family members who came across such things as a suicide note were themselves likely to destroy that evidence because even though they knew the truth, it would save other members of the family the extra pain, and they themselves may then be able to convince themselves to forget what they found. So this is not at all odd behaviour for the friends and family of the deceased.
The second reason is because of the faith of the disciples. We have to consider once again that right before Jesus was crucified, this group of disciples were cowards. But as soon as he rose from the dead, they all of a sudden turned into fearless preachers who were ready and willing to be beaten, burned, beheaded, sawed into 2, stoned, crucified, and even being willing to risk their very lives. So the question we have to ask is, why would this group of people be willing to risk their very lives for something they knew deep in their hearts was nothing more than a lie?
Again, some of them may have known the truth. Maybe they all did, or maybe they were all ignorant. But in neither of these situations does what you argue follow. Let's take the worst case scenario where they all knew. So what? They dedicated years of their life to teaching what Christ taught, giving up their trades to travel with him. Maybe they couldn't make it back into a trade. Maybe their choices were to preach and receive handouts that way, or to beg and receive handouts. And once captured, that was it. They ran the risk and were caught, as with all prisoners. Sure, the Bible says they didn't waver in their faith as they were tortured, but that's martyrdom. It looks good for the religion to assert without evidence that X never faltered in their beliefs before they died, because that assertion can be presented by those remaining as evidence to the gullible, such as yourself. Now let's say that 1 or 2 knew, but they had hidden it from the rest. The rest could have felt the situation had changed, that it was really a sign from God, and the ones who knew went along with it either out of guilt for abandoning their friend Jesus, like the Bible describes Peter as having done, or maybe it was still their only means of income. As for them all believing, so perhaps a different group entirely raided the tomb, then that's pretty obvious. But thing is, the Bible wasn't written by the apostles. It was written a couple generations later by entirely anonymous individuals, those who had been told the stories and decided to keep their faith going. So even if all the apostles did know, these aren't necessarily lies in the sense that the authors who wrote the Bible knew them to be lies. It was to them just factually wrong, but they had it on good word. But again, that's still not evidence.
The third reason is because of Jesus' post-resurrection appearances. Perhaps one of the most convincing proofs is the fact that the Bible says that after his suffering, he gave many convincing proofs that he was alive, and he appeared to them over a period of 40 days. The Apostle Paul goes on to say that at one time, Jesus appeared to over 500 people at one time, so much so that when he was writing this letter, he essentially told his readers, hey, if you don't believe me, you don't have to take my word for it. Go and speak to the people who saw them for themselves, because most of them are still alive today. So to say that Jesus really didn't rise from the dead would suggest that all of these hundreds of people were either crazy or hallucinating, which is highly unlikely.
Hey, did you know that I actually saw Godzilla in the River Thames the other week? I mean, millions of people were there, they all saw him, and they're all alive. Note that I'm not giving you any actual evidence or even names of these other people, so you cannot track them down in the exact same way Paul did. So you adding in that he gave people the ability to ask others is completely dishonest. He made unverifiable claims, and unless you have any new evidence to demonstrate otherwise, that was all.
Reason number 4 is that secular history confirms it. Now, it would be one thing if the Bible was the only book that recorded the miracle of the resurrection, but other secular history books record the same thing. First of all, it's recorded by a man named Josephus, who was a Jewish, non-Christian historian.
Josephus, born 37 CE, so that's 37 years after Jesus' supposed crucifixion, then wrote his volume Antiquities of the Jews in either 93 or 94 CE, so that's 93 years after the supposed crucifixion. Therefore, it's not a historical document of the events surrounding the crucifixion at all, like you pretended, any more than my videos made here today are evidence of Christ's resurrection. It's a piece written generations later about the beliefs and communities of the Jews and early Christians. All it is evidence of is that Christians existed and believed Christ was the Son of God. That's all.
Second of all, it was recorded by a man named Thomas Arnold, who wrote The History of Rome.
Thomas Arnold was born 1795 CE in Christian-ruled England as a devout Christian. The fact that you believe this to be evidence of Christ's resurrection is really telling on how poor your position truly is.
What makes these testimonies even stronger is that they were written by non-Christians who were simply seeking to be credible and trustworthy historians, which means they had to report the truth whether they liked it or not.
Absolute bollocks. All it actually means is that Josephus noted the existence and beliefs of Christians, and Arnold, a devout Christian himself who pushed for reform in the church because he was such a devout and involved follower, lived in a society where Christianity still dominated. Now you're just telling objective lies to try and pretend that you have some ground to stand on.
More recently, people like Frank Morrison, Lee Strobel, and Josh McDowell, all professed atheists, sought out to disprove the reality of the resurrection, thus proving that Christianity was nothing more than a false religion based on a myth. But as they dug into it and researched it more and more, they found that it was the undeniable truth, and eventually all of them converted over to Christianity.
So your argument is that people can be gullible, therefore Christ resurrected. If they actually had any evidence, you'd have gone through their books, selected said evidence, and presented it in a video titled X Shocking Proofs for Jesus' Resurrection. But instead you've simply made raw assertions without evidence and used examples of historians noting that Christians exist and have a set of beliefs before trying to argue from authority rather than evidence. People can be stupid all the time whilst pretending to have evidence for their position. That's all you're doing here right now. I don't care what conclusions a bunch of random people came to. I care about how they reached those conclusions, as that, and only that, will tell me whether said conclusions were formed on a solid basis.
And reason number 5 was that the missing body of Jesus Christ was never found. If Jesus never rose from the dead, then that means that his body would have still been in the grave, which means that all the Romans needed to do was simply reproduce the body of Jesus Christ, and then they would have settled the lie that Jesus rose from the dead, thus destroying Christianity forever. But the very fact that they could not reproduce the body is proof in and of itself that this miraculous event did occur in history.
Or it simply proves that A, they didn't care enough to be bothered by the words of a few fanatics because they had other things on their hands like running a soaring empire, or B, it was stolen by someone other than themselves. But let's just say it had happened and it really had bothered them. Wouldn't they just find another decomposing body? That's if any of these events ever happened whatsoever. There's so many holes in your arguments that it's just laughable. There are a few things which I'd just like to add here at the end of this video. The first is a massive thank you to everyone who has ever donated to me via Patreon. Your fantastic support has given me the ability to keep this channel going, and I hope to continue producing content in the years to come. Secondly, I would like to thank anyone who has ever interacted with this channel. Your shares, likes and dislikes, as well as your comments of both approval and disapproval, have ensured constant feedback, allowing me to improve my work. Last of all, I would like to express my desire that you treat any of the people displayed throughout the video with respect. Whilst it is true that ideas do not demand respect, and there are many in fact which deserve reprehension, we must be careful on how we tackle said ideas in ensuring we are not simply targeting the person. In short, be the compassionate side of reason. So take care, and I'll see you next time.